Eric, hello, and how are you? It's good to see you again.
Hi there, Anastasios.
What we were thinking with Jack of doing today and breaking it down, there's basically three pillars. I think the we'll start the interview mostly with artificial intelligence, touch upon quantum and a few questions there and use cases, and then maybe a couple of words about space, the new economy, and so on. What we're seeing today is a lot of tension existing for enterprise leaders between using proprietary, and when I say proprietary, think OpenAI versus open source LLMs and other models. And there's trade-offs that are perceived today between privacy, safety, and performance. How do you feel that large enterprises should be thinking about open source versus proprietary AI implementation?
You've asked the hardest question of all. And the answer is no one knows the answer to your question. Let me give you a way to think about it, though. On the one hand, you have these large corporations, of which OpenAI is now a large and important corporation, along with Microsoft. They will offer complete turnkey systems to a service that they run. And Microsoft now will take your data and put it in your own container and train on it. They've done a really good job there. So that seems attractive to somebody who is comfortable work with Microsoft, can work with their consulting services, can make it all work. I'm not sure that that's going to be the fastest or least expensive approach, but it will probably work. An alternative is to take open source models. Open source means that it's free and the weights are distributed to everybody, and build it yourself. And why would you do that? Well, it turns out that most businesses don't want their system to be continually learning. You actually want it to learn once and not misbehave. Imagine if you're busy building an advertising system and somehow it learns a particular bad thing about, putting Nazi ads next to, minorities, and, it just sort of got the thing wrong. And all of a sudden you've got a complete disaster. You don't want that. And so my own view is that most people will end up doing open source because it's cheaper. That the very sophisticated users, which I think is our audience, should really evaluate them against each other. One is going to be more powerful. The frontier models, as they're called, are definitely more powerful. But let me tell you, these open source models, they're getting really good, really fast. They don't cost anything. There'll be lots of people who can work with you to make them work. At the end of the day, I think it's a great competition because it'll keep both in check.
And do you think that the perceived trade-offs between open source and proprietary models are real? I mean, there's a big difference, or in the end, depending on the application and how you use it, which people work with you, how you develop it, and implement it in your business, the trade-off might not be as big.
Well, let's say that the proprietary ones, the really big ones, there are four now in development. Obviously, GPT-4, something called Gemini from Google, which doesn't work yet, Claude 2, which is from Anthropic, and something called Pi from Inflection. They look to me like they're going to remain closed, that is proprietary forever. And there's a simple reason. They've spent billions of dollars building these things. They're not going to give it away. They're not going to just hand it to you without a fee. It's too valuable. Now, the open source advocates are measuring the open source, which are 10 times smaller, against these frontier ones and saying, we're almost as good. Now, notice they didn't say better and they didn't say the same. We're almost as good. So that's the evaluation that will happen. There are other issues. Open source has the problem of proliferation because once you release it, the Chinese and the Russians will get it too. It's kind of obvious. But there's evidence that you can use the API calls of the big closed ones and confuse them as well. So the technology is just too early to really be a fully stable, predictable platform. I was thinking on your Mac or your Windows machine, on the powerful servers, on the big sites like Google and Facebook and Apple and so forth, they really run well because they don't have a lot of bugs because they have thousands of people developing it. But here in open source AI, we have 10 people. So you're just not going to get the same level of quality, but you'll get very fast iteration. I'm an open source person, but I'll tell you that in my history, but I'll tell you that it's a great fight. The fight's good for everybody.
And Eric, you recently announced the creation of QTI to advance open source AI research, and that is centered in the European Union. What was your motivation in doing this, and what do you aim to achieve with that?
Well, QTI is, which is formerly known as Sphere.ai, is a Parisian effort of 4 or 5 people who came out of Meta, Paris, and the DeepMind in London and Paris. And they're unusually good researchers. Now, if you're going to fund research, your research should be open source. QTI will deliver what they claim is really great progress on agents, on planning, on reinforcement learning, on strategic thinking. But, it's research, so we'll see. One of the things that's interesting about research in this space is how much money is required. It's not the programmers and the scientists they're well paid, trust me, they don't need more money. It's the computing hardware. If you're a physicist, you need to be next to your cyclotron or your accelerator. That's why everybody moved to Geneva, right? So they could literally be 2,000 of them are right there working on it because they need to be near it. It's the same with this generation, anyway, of AI.
Let me bring Amber. Amber is heading our technology network in YPO. Super active, has really tried and curated a lot of questions for today from our members. Amber, as we're waiting for Jack, if you would like to come in.
Hello, Eric. How are you?
Yeah, hi, Amber.
Perfect. Yeah, I know we pulled quite a few different questions from the technology network. Toss what you were asking. I think one of the ones that kept coming up was around the book that you had mentioned, the Big Nine. I actually read it after you mentioned it at Milken, of one of the books that you had recommended. And it was interesting on how it was talking about AI and the regulations and the things that the Big Nine are not focused on, and was just wondering why that book. There's so many great ones out there, and why that one stood out to you.
I think it was just interesting. Nothing in particular. If you would like a recommendation right now, I would recommend Mustafa's book, The Coming Wave, Mustafa Suleiman.
Yeah.
And it's the best current, that is right now, compendium of what's going on in tech that I've seen. I helped him with it a little bit. And then the next book after that will be the one that I publish with Craig Mundy and Dr. Kissinger in the spring of 2024. Dr. Kissinger died recently. It's a great personal tragedy. He's a good friend of mine. But in it, we talk a lot about what does the world look like when AI is generally available and you have a polymath in your pocket. And the framing that we're using is polymaths, the great inventors of science and brilliant people, are rare. And now you'll have millions and millions and millions of them. And it'll be he or she, I don't know if you give it a gender, would serve at your bidding. What would you do with it? Amber, what would you do with a polymath in your pocket? You certainly would ask it to do more than get you coffee. You might ask it to solve a physics problem or solve a math problem or tutor your child in some important science that you don't understand and don't care to know. So there's lots of interesting things when you have a polymath in your pocket that you can really do.
I just downloaded the Aristotle. The new ChatGPT one was like having Aristotle in your pocket, which was a nice little hobby. Thank you so much.
But these are coming, and in the next 5 years, which for the people in YPO we have a lot of years ahead for everybody in YPO, thank goodness. This will really transform your life. It'll transform your personal life. It'll transform your business. you could imagine eventually the polymaths will all be talking to each other, maybe 10 or 15 years from now, and you'll tell them, you guys sort out while Amber and I are having coffee. Or Jack and I can have a conversation through our polymaths, and Jack will say, oh, they figured it out. And I'll say, do you trust them? And Jack will say, yes, I do. And I'll say, okay, it's good enough for me. So the whole interactions that we're going to see with this is completely unexplored. And the way to say it negatively is that we launched social media 15 years ago without understanding the impact on society, which in my view is generally negative, although we can debate that. These things are far, far more powerful than social media, and they're coming.
Thank you for that. And Jack has joined us. Where I would like to take the conversation now a little bit, Eric, is to start moving a little bit beyond LLMs. As leaders and investors in some of the largest companies, the audience here, I believe, has got a fiduciary duty to understand and push for transformative AI use cases beyond just LLMs, what we mentioned. So my question to you is, from your perspective, what are some of the most impactful AI technologies that are not yet part of the global lexicon?
Well, first place, I went to they're called hackathons, where essentially young people who are working on this come up with ideas for a day. And all of the ideas for business consisted of learning what you are trying to do in an extremely personal way. Your tastes, the way you behave, the way you live your life, and then delivering it to you. So it makes sense to me that business will be transformed. We keep talking about personalized business, personalized marketing. I think it's going to become hyper-personalized, hyper-marketing. And frankly, the systems will understand the customers better than the salespeople, which is okay. I mean, that's they work for the salespeople, but they're fundamentally going to do a good job. To me, the most interesting things that are going on are in core science, and Jack should talk about this at some. Jack's company actually came up with an AI technique involving perturbation of chemistry, right? Which is really interesting because chemistry is really important. Now, I'll give you a general framework that any system which can go through or would benefit from looking at millions of combinations in a second or two, and then can easily evaluate if the combinations are good. So in other words, lots of choices and an easy test if it's better is amenable to these approaches. Basically, look at where you are, look at all the possible combinations, figure out what is the best one and do it. This applies to material science, to physics, to chemistry, and there's a whole new generation of PhD students and mathematicians who are getting their PhDs right now in universities around the world that are developing these. This platform is an enormous accelerator for science and business. Jack?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Building, Tasso, on what Eric said, LLMs are great when you have a lot of data. The data, as Eric talked about in his book, 3 different factors drove this convergence. On the one hand, we have this plethora, this explosion of data on the web. Second, we had the GPU chips. And third, we had the actual techniques, the neural network techniques, the deep learning techniques. All that came together in this explosion. But in much of the real world, the world in which we want to develop new drugs for Alzheimer's, for Parkinson's, for brain cancer, for pancreatic cancer, for conditions that we do not have any good drugs for. Eric mentioned material science. That includes batteries. Battery chemistry is key to the electric vehicle revolution. But even bigger than that is actually storing of renewable energy, solar, wind, and other forms of clean energy. How do you do that if you're stuck in one form of battery chemistry right now, as we are? So be it drug discovery, be it material science, we can look at other applications. In these cases, actually, we don't have big data to train on. So what do? Well, this is where another AI technique, and a technique that I think is going to be right up there in the global lexicon in the next few years, right alongside LLMs, it's called AI simulation. And as Eric mentioned, what we do is we actually use first principles physics to build the data from scratch. We literally drive the calculations to say, what would this molecular structure do in a virtual human body before we go test it in a clinical trial? What would this battery chemistry do that doesn't have lithium involved? What would that do to power density, energy density, cost, and weight, driving an electric vehicle, where we don't have to depend, for example, on cobalt, which is very difficult to source well, and lithium. And this new data set becomes the driver of a very different kind of AI, one that is complementary to LLMs. LLMs are great when you have to drive content, images, video, incredible explosion of creativity there and impact. But also now we have simulation, which drives the material science, the battery chemistry, the drug discovery, and then we can apply deep learning techniques to this new data set. So part of the leadership in the next 5 or 10 years in AI is not just the algos, it's not just the chips, but who has the data? Data we normally think of as data that already exists. Sure, hospitals have data. There's data on the web. There's lots of images on the web that you could train LLMs on. But how about data that you create from scratch? This is going to be a new area of leadership as well.
I'm working with a Caltech group to work on partial differential equations, which I vaguely remember from graduate school. And it turns out that if you get enough data in science, you can build a simulator for partial differential equations that is computable. Many of the physics problems, chemistry problems, are not in fact computable. They're just too complicated. And what's interesting is that, to support Jack's point, there is not enough data in physics that they can train against, but they understand physics. So what they do is they build a physics module and they generate the data, which is by definition correct. So what you're going to see in the next 5 years are incredibly clever pipelines where what problem are we trying to solve? Do we have enough data? Can we take existing data and then add some more? Can we then figure out a way to look at all the choices? Can we evaluate them? And then can we fine tune them? And this process that I'm describing, I think is the current state of the art of the technology. We're very focused on LLMs because everyone kind of understands that. It's this thing that you can talk to, but their real use will be embedded in something. Jack and I have a friend who's running a company involving the stock market. And in her case, she didn't use one large LLM, she used 5 little LLMs. And each of the LLMs does a slightly different aspect of information discovery in a particularly clever way, and it produces much better results. So it will not be one solution for all, one chat GPT, whatever that solves everything. It will be this explosion. And I think this is good because this is how science works. You have an invention, and give these guys credit. They really did invent something new in the last 5 years, starting with the transformer paper, the discovery of coding completion by Dario in OpenAI, the release of ChatGPT 3.5, but that is the spark for a diffusion of techniques and algorithms at a scale that's really hard to describe.
And talking about that, Eric, what do you think is one of the biggest mistakes that you see leaders making when thinking about their AI strategy?
Well, what I tell business leaders to do is, and I say this in hopefully a polite way, you don't understand this at all. You're frankly just too old. And I don't say it that way, but basically there's a very small number of people, they're very young typically, they really do understand this. And you have to find them. So in your business, simply say to every function, I want to see your best ideas of how to use AI. My favorite one is I'm on the board of the Mayo Clinic. And the the insurance companies reject their medical claims. So they built a system which uses this technology to appeal the letters that they get by writing fake letters back, right? Which are done by computers. So the computer generates the letter, Mayo responds to the letter, complaining, and then presumably eventually there will be an AI judge that will decide between the two competing AIs. Now, this is, of course, madness, but this is how our insurance system works in America. But my point is that's a very straightforward tactical problem. It's easily understood in a business. We have to do something with customer service in this case, we have to do it verbally and so forth. So I would say that the thing to do, the most important thing to do is tomorrow or tonight or today, send an email to everyone who reports to you saying, I want in 2 weeks to see all your best ideas. The crazy ones, the stupid ones, the simple ones, and I want to get started. And that will cause the people who understand this stuff to bubble up in your company. And those will be gold to you.
Eric and I have been addressing a number of leaders, not just in business, but also in the institutional investment arena. And when they look at their portfolio companies and they say, hey, what are you doing with AI? Often the leaders come back and say, oh, we're doing a lot of great stuff. We're using it to cut costs, doing it different ways. When you dig a little deeper, what you find is it's really very shallow cases that they're applying it to. Some marketing generation of material for content for the website and some videos. Perhaps they're using it for customer relations. But when you get into the inside of the company, for example, I was talking with an automotive company, one of the largest in the world, asked them what they're doing with AI. Again, marginal use cases. Are they using AI right now in the development of the car itself? New materials for the actual automobile, for the battery, for how do you design the electronics, the entertainment system, the actual core of the car itself. Aerospace, the same thing. When you ask a pharma company, hey, pharma company, how are you using AI? What you find is there's an innovation team, right? And this gets to Eric's point of emailing everyone in your company. Typically, the innovation team or maybe a CTO team has gone off and led with the AI applications. But the core product development has been left behind and is not really applying AI in a deep way. This is where I would say we need to double down and ask the tougher questions. How can you use AI, simulation, other tool sets now in the large toolbox to really change the dynamics of your core industry? Right now, for example, in pharma, it takes about 14 years on average to get from molecule to medicine. It takes about $3 billion, 90% failure at the end of that. Are we using these tools to really change that dynamic? Not just reduce some costs at the margin. These are the tougher questions I think we're trying to encourage people to ask.
And Eric, let me dive a little bit deeper because you already touched upon something that I think is critical. When we look at critical skills of leaders to effectively manage this AI adoption, obviously being humble enough to admit that you don't know, obviously being open to listening, right? That you have to hear other people. Are there any other critical skills that I think, or rather that you think, that leaders are going to need to effectively manage this AI adoption?
Well, we are in the digital age, and every business is being transformed by digital technology in one form or another. The most interesting idea is what Jack just said, which is take this technology and rebuild your entire product. For the vast majority of business executives, that is not practical. They don't have the people inside the company to do it. So what happens then is that they are open to a startup that could enter into the space and compete with them. The obvious one being Tesla, as a good example. How did Tesla show up and redo the entire automobile industry globally? Well, they had a lot of innovation, including a very strong technical founder. But the fact of the matter is they did the work. They built the teams, products failed, all sorts of stuff happened, but they invented a new way of building cars in terms of their design. Using the car analogy, DeepMind figured out a way to build a different kind of brake for electric cars. I don't know if the electric vehicles are all using that brake, but they should. It's more efficient, uses less power, it's regenerative, and so forth. So you have to have a keen understanding of where you are in the innovation chain. So the ideal CEO in the digital age understands the digital technology extremely well, is very familiar with it. They understand it, and they drive the company. They are the chief innovation officer. Because nowadays, the marketing, the distribution, financing is relatively globally available, but innovation remains in short supply. So the CEO should define themselves as the chief innovation officer and figure out what that innovation path is. And don't just tell me it's branding. It's actual invention.
And Eric, as people progress and go down that path, there's a question that keeps coming up and surfacing from people that are not as close to AI as you are. And I'll take a question from David Young from YPO Gold Taiwan, which is, what happens if, or could machines actually and AI eventually take over? And what are, mistakes we could make along the path to lead us in that direction if it is possible?
Everyone in this audience has seen all of the movies, and the movies all look like this. There is a killer robot invented, and then the female scientist battles the killer robot, and she wins. That's the Hollywood plot. And we're not building killer robots, so this is an unlikely scenario in the next 5 years. My own view for the next 5 years is that things are going to be relatively peaceful. That the problems that we see today, whether it's pipelining, data generation, hallucinations, what is called groundedness, recency, all of these problems that you can observe as a user, they're all going to get fixed. And I think they're going to be fixed in good engineering ways. I'm not too worried. And as we discussed a little earlier, the open source versus closed source battle will help that because it's competition, and that competition will drive it. At some point, you're going to have a perfect assistant that's under your control. That assistant will really help you be successful. And I would argue that that's going to be the end of the great period of AI for the following reason. After that perfect assistant happens, there will be an innovation. The technical term is called recursive self-improvement, where this perfect assistant begins to learn on its own. And at some point, maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, many people think it's 5 years, I think it's 10, these systems will be able to set their own goals, technically their own objective functions, their own reward functions. That is completely unexplored. And the problem is that you've got a polymath that's setting its agenda going forward, but it doesn't have human values. It doesn't understand that life is sacred, that morality is important, that religion is a part of human experience, that respect for others is a core component, that reciprocal altruism is a core part of how humans work. You do something for me, I do something for you, it sort of works out. All of these unwritten rules are not going to be inside of this system. At that point, I think we're going to have some serious conversations. My joke on this is, do you know what we're going to do when those computers start talking to each other? We're going to unplug them because they're going to talk to each other in languages where we don't understand what they're talking about. Can you imagine having all of these polymaths that are busy talking to each other and you don't know what they're talking about? They could be talking about destroying you. They could be talking about going out to coffee. They could be jealous that you're human and that they're not. We have no idea. I don't think America, I don't think humans, I don't think the world is going to be comfortable with just kind of random activity there. We will see.
And as a follow-on question that comes from Dimitri Argyropoulos from YPO Europe 1 is, if you think that this is likely to happen before we unplug, should the conversation today be about perhaps setting up a regulatory framework or a body that could regulate, not limit, and I think that's important, allow the progress, but put certain guidelines in place and regulate quantum AI in everyday life? Do you think that that is something feasible or something we should be having the conversation?
There's a lot of people who ask this question. The people in Europe ask it as though they're going to do it. And the problem with European mindset, in the spirit of just being completely direct, is that you can't regulate ahead of the innovation. The innovation has to occur, and then you regulate it as it occurs. For two reasons. One is you don't actually understand, no one understands what's going to happen. And the second is that unless you have global regulation, which means the UN with real force, which we don't have, one or more countries will then get advantage because they won't follow the rules. So I think that these calls for 6 months moratorium are misguided. I think the AI Act in the EU is a disaster because it's going to effectively hold back open source development in Europe. This has been well publicized, and Brussels, as usual, is not listening to the technologists because they don't get it and they're going to screw it up. This favors the United States and it favors the UK. China has not yet decided to apply its regulatory power, which is quite severe, to AI because they don't know it yet. So let's be clear. There will be regulation. These systems are powerful and they are fantastically good, and they will need to be regulated for a number of reasons. I have a long list. But this rush to regulation is really a mistake when you're inventing something that can have this level of human economic power. OpenAI defines AGI, general intelligence, as intelligence that's better than the best human. I'd like to see that. I'd also like to regulate, but I'd like to see it first.
It reminds me of the words of Igor Sikorsky when he actually built a helicopter. He said, thank God the FDA wasn't around, otherwise we would have never had a helicopter in the first place. And indeed, it was, we get it, and then we start regulating the innovation. So
my joke on this is, can you imagine if cars had not existed, and my friend Jack here had invented the automobile today? Everyone would say, this is the stupidest idea ever. You're going to take a human being and let them drive a 2-ton vehicle at 60 miles an hour or 100 kilometers an hour and run over people. We need to ban cars.
Indeed, very interesting perspective, huh?
So, and thank God we have cars. And of course, what happened was there was a lot of damage and they really did scare the horses. But over 50 years, we have a very sophisticated regulatory structure, which means cars are really quite safe. They're really remarkably safe, even when we allow humans to drive them.
That's it. Let me also add to that. You know, in the rush to understand AI and to embrace it and possibly regulate as well, we have to also look at all the positive impacts. And if we slow down AI in certain areas, we're going to have an impact on those areas. So let's just take education. Eric just talked about an AI assistant that gets to know you better than any other human maybe in your life. And part of that interaction is lifelong learning. The idea of AI-based education is not just for kids. Maybe as important, maybe even more important, is lifelong learning. Right now, we try to do it in society, but generally speaking, we fail. Generally speaking, as Eric mentioned before, most people in companies today are not upskilling to the new technologies. Part of what's missing is a great personal tutor that can take you step by step in the mode that you like. Some people like learning by video. Some people like learning by text. Some people like learning in other modalities. And this AI will drive that and even create content on the spot. That's something we never had before in education. We have failed the students in K through 12. We have failed lifelong learners. This is an opportunity to make sure we can actually finally get that right. So part of how the government, I think, should be looking at AI is, yes, let's look at some of the potential dangers, some of the impacts, but also let's embrace and push forward the really good use cases. And I think AI for education is one of the core things that could really change our society. 200 years of educational, quote unquote, reform have all failed. We're essentially still in the Benjamin Franklin format of education. And we have not moved beyond that. Zoom classes do not count as innovation. Sorry. This is an opportunity for us to really leapfrog as a human species. This kind of education can take us in a massive, massive leap forward and really enable a lot of people to get new skills. I was just with one of the ministers in the UK. In his constituency, 3,000 people are losing their jobs due to a displacement of a large company. And so he's asking himself and asking his advisors, how do I retrain these 3,000 people? These are real life cases. We see this across the US, across the UK, but also across the entire world, and particularly the emerging markets where people are just now joining the smartphone revolution. 3 billion people are about to get a smartphone in the next 36 months. $3 billion in the next 36 months. An example we've been with Mukesh Ambani is giving out and selling very inexpensive smartphones in his Jio product in India. 600 million people will get a smartphone in India in the next 2 years. So what do? Do we just sell ads on these kinds of platforms? Or can we use these platforms for an AI-generated education system? This is, I think, really exciting. And I think we're going to see, I hope we're going to see a lot of innovation. Eric, I don't know if you have further thoughts on that.
YPO is really about getting the next generation of great leaders together. How will we get the next generation of leaders after this generation? And the answer is more education globally, more investment in it, more investment in digital, more investment in using these tools in all sorts of ways. I'm old enough to actually think about this question about my grandfather told me that nobody got a PhD when he was young. My father said PhDs were kind of okay, but still rare. And they encouraged me to get my PhD because it was much more available. It was much more common. So in 100 years, you've seen this enormous increase in advanced education, graduate level education. So one of the things to say, and I want to be as blunt as possible, is that the future age of intelligence, as I call it, is going to favor the educated. It's going to favor exactly what Jack said. And I'm open to how you get educated as long as you get educated, right? There are many different ways of doing it. And I worked with Steve Jobs, who was famously a dropout. I worked with others who have also dropped out. Bill Gates, of course, dropped out of Harvard. But all of these people were incredibly smart, and they learned in other mechanisms. So it can be done, but learning is everything, is the answer.
And Eric, if I may take a conversation for a moment, because we'll come back to AI, but I want to talk a little bit also about advanced computing, quantum tech. We've been hearing for a long time it's coming. Last time you and I had a conversation, we talked about quantum. We're still not there. There's a question that's constantly surfacing in YPO, and I'll take like Antonio Rodriguez. Is there a time frame that you believe, that you estimate, that binary computing will be rendered obsolete? Will it ever be rendered obsolete?
I think it's unlikely in my lifetime. And the reason is that the CMOS revolution, which has been going on in one form or another for 50 years, is not quite done yet. I'll give you some numbers. TSMC is building chips that are at the 3 nanometer level. The width of an atom is like 1 nanometer. So they're very close to the physics limits. The next one is 2 nanometers, which is in a few years, and that requires $100 billion of capital to invest. And there's probably at least one more of 1.4, 1.5 nanometers before the electrons start misbehaving. So we've got some number of cycles, and then after that, we have new packaging, new architectures, and so forth. It's going to be a long time before that fully runs out. Jack, you should talk about the timelines for quantum. What's interesting about your company, because you and I work very closely on it, is you're able to use the principles of quantum without a quantum computer and still get the benefits of quantum science.
As Eric said, there's a long way to go that we'll still need, and we still will use CPUs, GPUs, the kind of innovations that you're seeing now in the semiconductor, and that will work alongside quantum. One doesn't replace the other. They're in a hybridized mesh. One area that Eric is referring to is quantum sensing. So most of the press, Tasso, gets really focused on quantum computing. But before we get to that, let's talk about a very near-term application of quantum technology. That is sensors. Whether people know it or not, they've actually touched and been inside quantum sensors. If you've been inside of an MRI machine or a PET scan or those kinds of scanners, you've been in a quantum sensor. But that's a sensor from the previous generation of sensors, back from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Those are cryogenic. Inside that MRI machine, it's actually really cold in there. We need liquid helium to go make that super cold. So not very practical to spread out to so many places. And that's why it's still expensive to get an MRI machine. However, the new generation of quantum sensors takes it to a whole different level. These are small form factor, room temperature. We have them right now in a number of hospitals around the world, detecting how your heart's doing. Our hearts emit not only electric fields, but also magnetic fields. And so instead of electrocardiography, we're now talking about magnetocardiography, MCG. MCG was proven years ago to be even more robust and rich as a diagnostic tool than EKG or ECG. But again, that old form factor back from the 80s and 90s rendered it very, very difficult. Now, with very small form factor quantum devices, and this is important, with AI with it. Why is that? Because the quantum device is so sensitive, it pulls in everything. If you have an iPhone nearby, it's going to pull that in as well as a signal. How do we distinguish the signal from the noise when you're looking at the heart, as an example? This is where the GPU on top of a quantum sensor and an AI model on top of that GPU, that triple stack, sensor, GPU, AI model, that triple stack, which is now in hospitals around the country, that is what's going to change medical diagnosis forever. So instead of being decades away on those kinds of timelines, this is something actually very near term. We don't need error correction for quantum sensors. We don't need multiple qubits. And another application I should mention to the YPO audience here of great interest, because we all fly a lot, is navigation for airplanes, for cars, autonomous cars, and also for naval vessels. Right now, GPS is getting jammed around the world. We see more and more of this over the Pacific Ocean. In the Middle East right now, there's actually beyond jamming, there's actually spoofing going on. People actually sending the wrong GPS signal to planes. And 6 planes just moved into hostile space, not knowing they were going there because they thought the GPS said something else. We can now navigate with quantum sensors, again, with an AI model, getting that signal from the noise. So this fusion of bringing quantum sensors, very near term, right here, right now, already developed, with AI to pull the signal out from the noise, this, Tassos, is a very near-term application. When it comes to quantum computing, there's going to be different stages. What we're seeing is there's 7 different major ways of building a quantum computer, 7 physically different ways. You can use photons, you can use superconducting, lots of different ways of doing it. And each one of those is making some steady progress. We're seeing even announcements this week. You'll see some announcements coming out in this area from a variety of companies. But what the major thing is, as these scale, they will work on the cloud. They're cloud native, all these quantum computers. So you can access from the cloud. One takeaway, hopefully, from this YPO session is don't buy a quantum computer. No need to. It's on the cloud. You can access it. Every new qubit that you hear gets added is a Moore's law doubling of the capability of that quantum computer, and you'll use it in a mesh between GPUs and what we can now call QPUs, quantum processing units. Over the next few years, you're going to start to see that ramp up, but it doesn't get rid of the GPUs. In fact, the GPUs will be the workhorse driving a lot of this and then subroutining out to the QPU as you need it, bringing back the information and then continuing with that plan. So I think there's going to be very near term, literally next 24 months applications with quantum sensing, Tassos, and then we'll see 5 to 10 years more and more in the meshed computing space, hybridized GPU and QPU.
No, Jack, that's I find very helpful because obviously, knowing real world applications today is something so important, and it's interesting to see that people don't have to wait for 2 decades to do things. Eric, coming back to one thing we were discussing before, how important would you say will collaboration be and open source development in quantum computing? Do you think it's important, or do you think that we'll have a similar model like AI where you have people developing something on their own and you can use a combination of, they can be a competition, or is it important that this actually becomes more open source and more available?
Well, the hardware is by definition not open source. You have to actually build it. It's pretty clear to me, and Jack should weigh in, that the research will all be done open source. So in order to program quantum computers and work in quantum spaces, you have to have different kinds of programming languages. Those will all be open source. And so the state of the world today in terms of research is open source, publish your results, transparency, fast diffusion of knowledge. And I think that will continue.
Just to add to Eric's points, Yeah, on terms of the programming languages and the framework in which we actually give instructions to quantum computers, that's already all open source. There's a number of open source frameworks, Circ, Qiskit, many others, and people now are actively coding in these different places. The good news is the main programming language behind all this is Python, which most of us are already very familiar with. So we don't have to learn a strange new language. We do have to learn how to program in a slightly different way with these interesting new computers. On the hardware side, we're seeing about 4 or 5 dozen companies around the world that are pretty well funded, but we're also seeing a lot of innovation at the university side. So as a few examples, if you look at the Chicago area, University of Chicago has teamed up with 2 major national labs to create the Chicago Quantum Exchange. That also involves quantum computing and, interestingly enough, Tassos, quantum networking. Eventually, there's going to have to be a second parallel internet. Today's internet is great for the kinds of stuff we're doing right now over Zoom. But if you want to actually connect 2 quantum devices and have them actually work on actual states of superposition entanglement, you actually need a different kind of internet. That'll be a 10 to 20 year time frame in which this is going to be built. And so Chicago's doing that. In the UK, they have a lot of innovation. Look at Australia, UNSW, University of New South Wales, and a whole consortium called the Sydney Quantum Academy. 4 or 5 different universities coming together, driving a lot of hardware innovation and also quantum communications innovation as well. So we're seeing a lot of activity in universities. We're seeing activity in the companies. But maybe, Eric, coming back to the kind of work you and I do when we get universities to collaborate, talking about how AI, quantum could drive science, I think this is another part of the collaboration we should maybe address today. How do we actually change the drivers of science itself, of pushing the envelope of discovery? And so, Eric, maybe you want to mention some of the initiatives around, thinking about taking advanced compute, specifically AI, but not just limited to AI, but thinking about science and that kind of collaboration in a new way.
Well, frankly, I don't understand where the path will go, but I know it will be large. And so I did a relatively broad rifle shot where we basically are beginning to put money into postdocs for any interesting application of AI in science. So in other words, we'll just sort of invest in the people. The ones that are the most interesting to me start with chemistry. I didn't understand how important chemistry was for our daily life. It's an aspect of everything. We talked about energy, material science, and so forth. And chemistry and biology have the kind of pattern structures that AI is particularly good at. I'll give you another example. LLMs, the transformer architectures, essentially predict the next word. Well, there are plenty of digital sequences in science where predicting the next number or the next vector is actually an important part of the science. So even there, we can take relatively simple transformer architectures and apply them. And again, there are new non-transformer architectures which are even more powerful. The issues around vision are largely solved. So computers see better than we do. Sorry, get over it. The next one is the ability to predict sequences and to generate new information. The generative design revolution, which is going to change every business, is really a part of that. If a system can analyze something, it can also generate a new version of something. And that duality is important in AI.
One final takeaway from you, for the people who are watching, what would you say is the one thing you would like them leaving this conversation to go back and think about and focus on as a first priority, and something that you think would really help them both in their thinking and in really transforming their business?
I've been fortunate in my life to work with people much smarter than I. And when I find them, I collect them. One of them is Jack Hidary, who's on the Zoom. His brain is polymathic and he just thinks about these things. If I were each and every one of you in the audience, I would find my own Jack Hidary. You can find one who looks different and so forth, but it doesn't have to look like Jack. But you need that kind of analytical and brilliant mind to work with you, unless you are that person, and I'm not. That's point one. Point two is this is going to happen much faster than you all are ready for. I'm telling you, you think you kind of get it, you kind of figured it out, your friends are doing it, your teams are talking about it. Because of the amount of money and because of the power of the tools and because of the global scale of this, it's going to happen very fast. This is the new platform for competition. If you want your business to win, you need to be on that wave. You need to be riding it. And do not accept the sort of satisficing terms like, oh, that's good enough, right? Take Jack's point. Why don't you take an objective of right now to write better customer rejection letters and next month redo every aspect of the design of everything you build? Take a broad goal and say, I'm the leader. I'm not going to be okay until I achieve it all. Don't take good enough for granted. If you do, you're going to lose.
Tassos, building on what Eric just said, I think it's critical that all of us as YPO members, I'm a YPO member myself, and we're all leaders of our businesses. So whether you're in transportation and logistics, whether you're in energy, whether you're in the biotech and pharma area, whether you're in apparel and textiles, if you're in any of these different sectors, this is the time to ask the hard questions. Not just how you can use AI at the margin, not just how you can save a little bit of money end of the year in terms of some costs and expense, but how do you deeply rethink the workflow of your industry, the dynamics of your industry. Most industries are very ripe for this kind of disruption. I mentioned already the dismal numbers in the pharma industry, 13, 14 years to get one drug going, 90% failure in clinical trials. Look at the automotive industry. It's taking 3-4 years to develop one model of the next car. That could be brought down probably to 1.5 years. Look at other industries, energy. We are still dealing with an aging grid, a grid that is failing us in so many different ways. We have almost no storage on the grid. People may not realize, but every electron that gets created on the grid has to be used right away, because otherwise it literally has to be grounded, put into the ground, wasted. In fact, 40% of the electrons that we generate at night in the US get grounded. We don't use them. They get wasted. And so how do we rethink industry after industry, given these new techniques? The techniques of AI and LLMs on the one hand, when you have a lot of data, but again, these techniques that Eric and I discussed of simulation, where you could actually drive the physical world in completely new ways. So I think this is a really exciting moment for humanity. And then just to close, I think back on the education front, this is the one application of AI that I am personally most excited about. I think the development of human potential is so exciting and so important, and one that I think will impact all of us, particularly now that we're closing the digital divide. Finally, getting 7-8 billion people online. What do we do with that precious resource? What we can do, we can harness it to unleash human potential.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure. You've been extremely kind with YPO and the use of your time and the insights. I do hope to continue this conversation, because it is a conversation that every year will have a next chapter. Very appreciative. Thank you so much, and look forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, you guys are a great organization. I know so many members. It has changed their lives. Anything that I or Jack can do to help you, sign us up. Thank you very much.
Super. Thank you.